Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 31st day of January in the year of our Lord 2025. I will be talking about the Senate confirmation hearings for Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence and for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. These two nominees represent the last line of defense for the pharmaceutical and permanent war parties. Therefore, they will pull out all stops to defeat them. Once again, I begin this report with a quote from Dennis Kucinich. Quote, Congresswoman Gabbard is uniquely qualified for this role. As a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, she has served our nation with distinction since 2002, earning top secret clearance through the trust of the Department of Defense, her executive officers, and peers. There are few individuals as prepared, as experienced, and as committed to the national interest as Lieutenant Colonel Tulsi Gabbard. Her leadership has consistently demonstrated sound judgment, ethical standards, and an unwavering commitment to the Constitution of the United States, end quote. Well, okay, Dennis, that explains the problem for Tulsi. Not many of those who sit in judgment of her share that commitment to ethical standards and especially the Constitution that Mr. Kucinich tells us that Tulsi has, and none of them are worthy of her, not one. This report had to be recorded before the vote, but I watched her opening statement. It was an epic statement. She would be one of the best ever if she could just be allowed to serve. I think Bobby Kennedy will be able to squeak by all those prostitutes the pharmaceutical industry has sent to block his confirmation, but I'm kind of worried about Tulsi. She's the most important name on the list. I wonder why they hate her, why they fear her more than all the other nominees. What fearful thing does she represent to them and their sponsors? But then the answer came to me. This administration tells us that it is going to be about full transparency, and it fulfilled that pledge at least partially by announcing that the classified files on JFK, RFK, MLK will be declassified and released in keeping with the idea of transparency. 2025 is the 50th anniversary of what came to be known as the Church Committee. The formal name of the Church Committee was the United States Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. It was chaired by Senator Frank Church, a Democrat from Idaho, thus the name that stuck. Things started coming to light in the early 1970s about what the U.S. intelligence apparatus might be doing to its own citizens. These leaks were at a time of growing dissatisfaction with the Vietnam War. Senator Church was an outspoken critic of the war. The New York Times published an article by Seymour Hersh detailing operations conducted by the CIA, including assassinations of foreign leaders as well as operations against citizens of the U.S. Based on their political views, Senator Church put his committee together to investigate these things. 1975 became known in media circles as the Year of Intelligence. Many things were discovered by the Church Committee, and these things were of an extremely embarrassing and extremely disturbing nature. The things that Senator Church and his committee uncovered revealed to the American people that in many ways the elite who ran this country were at least as bad as the elite who ran all the other countries. It would be hard to exaggerate the degree of scum this committee uncovered, living in what some have come to refer to as permanent Washington. That they infest the woodwork in Washington and live administration after administration doing their destructive work. The most shocking and disturbing thing uncovered was an operation called MK Ultra, which involved the drugging and torture of unknowing U.S. citizens who were guilty of nothing except being loyal to their country. MK Ultra was part of a vast CIA experiment on human beings using drugs, trauma, and other means to control their minds. Countless people were victims and had their minds destroyed by this evil program, but most importantly, it was proven to work. It worked. It proved that it would be easy to control the minds, thoughts, and actions of people who were subjected to years of traumatic torture and mind-altering drugs such as LSD. The experiments were not directed at any one individual, but were intended as an experiment in control of an entire population, despite the fact that Senator Frank Church and his committee revealed this to the world, the whole world. Many refused to believe that their government could be so evil. That proves, at least partially, that the experiment worked. This part is my own theory, I admit, but I believe it's a valid theory. The CIA took control of the American media by allowing and encouraging the consolidation of the various news outlets, with the result that some 50 media sources were reduced to a carefully controlled 5 or 6. The New York Times, the Washington Post came on board and became nothing more than mouthpieces for CIA propaganda. My theory then, to cut it short, is that MK Ultra was proving to work and is now being conducted against the entirety of the American people, divide us through race, gender, class distinctions, so that we all hate each other. We hate anyone who represents what we perceive as the other side, which we often refer to as fascist or Nazi. In the end, the deep state is manipulating all of us because it is far easier to control and manipulate divided people. Our own government and all its intelligence apparatus has joined forces with international globalists, led by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and its various offshoot agencies. To give credence to my theory, another program the Church Committee discovered was called COINTELPRO, which involved the surveillance and infiltration of American political and civil rights organizations, as well as programs specifically designed to target and assassinate foreign leaders. People of influence who refused to toe the line were eliminated on their way up, if possible. If not, once they refused the money and they were proven to be scandal-free, the third option was employed. The three most prominent examples: JFK, RFK, and MLK. That's why the release of the files on these men's assassinations will most likely contain very damning records about the government, as well as those men and their personal lives. The CIA knew all about their personal lives because they followed them incessantly. This information is not just my fantasy, folks. It's well documented. The Kennedy brothers knew that Martin Luther King was being followed, photographed, and recorded by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, but apparently they didn't know the same thing was happening to them. Frank Church worked on this committee for all of 1975, but his findings were not published until 1976. Most of the really damaging information was classified and kept out of the report at CIA request. The final item that proves my theory is correct was the uncovering of Operation Shamrock, in which the telecommunications companies, or what we would call today major media companies, shared their traffic and their information with NSA, the National Security Agency, from the end of World War II until the Church Committee uncovered it. Virtually every important name in Hollywood was on the list of people to be followed and observed. Some other names on the list: Walter Mondale, Howard Baker, Ralph Abernathy, and Frank Church. Now remember, Howard Baker and Frank Church were actually on the Church Committee. Yes, Frank Church was under surveillance along with all those Hollywood stars such as Gregory Peck. Senator Church served as an intelligence officer in World War II, assigned to the jungles of China and Burma. I guess that's where his interest in the truth about who did what originated. He ran for the Democrat nomination for president in 1980. He won a few state primaries, but ultimately he lost the nomination to Jimmy Carter. In 1984, he suddenly developed a fast-moving cancer and was dead within a few days. I think Jack Ruby had that same cancer. That's what gave him the courage to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald on national television. He was going to die anyway, it seems. Yes, he was going to die anyway, folks. Are Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy the second coming of Frank Church? I don't know about that. But I do know that permanent Washington and its prostitutes who sit in judgment of them seem to think so. In 2016, Trump was a novice at this political game. He didn't understand how completely evil the people who play it are. His nominees, at least, the good ones, were consistently denied confirmation, this time is different because he has learned and because the people put him in charge and gave him a mandate to change the system of unaccountable power in charge of permanent Washington. He has warned the Republican senators that they may face consequences if they don't let him have who he wants in his cabinet. Each of his nominees was specifically chosen as someone who supports what he is trying to do with regard to peace, prosperity, and most of all, transparency. He opened the door to let people have a better understanding of the truth about technology, responsibility, and the very nature of the state. His pardon of Ross Ulbricht is illustrative of my point that transparency empowers people. Ulbricht started an internet site known as Silk Road. From that site, people could transact business using Bitcoin and other cryptos. Excuse me, folks. Using Bitcoin and other cryptos in complete privacy. Whatever they wanted to buy or sell, whether drugs, guns, anything else, was permitted. The government simply could not and would not allow that to happen, so he was arrested, charged with running a continuing criminal enterprise, among other charges. Despite being a nonviolent person with no criminal record, he was given a double life sentence without the possibility of parole. The judge implied that his, quote, privilege added to his sentence. He exhausted his appeals and he had no chance of ever being free without a pardon. Trump went to speak to the Libertarian Convention that year and said he would pardon Mr. Ulbricht if elected, and he fulfilled that promise. A quote from President Trump, quote, "I just called the mother of Ross William Ulbricht to let her know that in honor of her and the Libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to have just signed a full and unconditional pardon of her son, Ross. The scum that worked to convict him were some of the same lunatics who were involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me. He was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Ridiculous." That was a wonderful statement by the president. The words scum, lunatics, and ridiculous show that Trump truly hates those who have persecuted him and other libertarian-minded people. It leads me to believe that he will seek retribution against those who have done these things. He will try to root out those who have committed such crimes as those crimes against Ross Ulbricht. But he will need both Tulsi and Bobby Kennedy to do it. That's at least part of the reason why they will be defamed and vilified. The guilty persecute the innocent in this post-World War II America. Unfortunately, the Constitution is a dead letter now. So he's attempting to rule by executive order. Congress and the Senate are basically so dysfunctional that nothing can get done of any consequence. They are all, or virtually all, captive to the various special interest groups who are supposedly regulated by them. Understanding the deep state as it really is gives us at least a chance to hold it in contempt, as Donald Trump obviously does. Permanent Washington will resist every step of the way as the American people try to use their second-to-last resort to take back their country, and that step is, of course, voting. Finally, folks, what is at stake with these confirmation hearings for Tulsi and Bobby Kennedy could not be more important. They want to unleash the beast that is transparency, and that threatens the very people who sit in judgment of them. They are deciding right now, as I record this, who runs America. At least that's the way I see it. Till next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.